The headlines from the Shropshire by-election will rightly focus on it being a humiliation for the Conservative Party. But Labour also lost ground in the constituency. The party fell from second place in 2019 to third place. You can see here the vote share over time. This time around, they got 9.7%. That's the lowest it's been in the constituency since it was created in 1983. And there were some in the media. Dan Hodges from the Mail on Sunday tweeted, "On the by-election, disastrous result for Boris, but a pretty terrible result for Starmer as well." So despite commentary like that, Labour frontbenchers don't seem too worried about the by-election result. Jonathan Reynolds is the shadow business secretary. He explained his thoughts.
The Liberal Democrats, the nature of them, they're not a party with any kind of strong ideological moorings. That makes them a very potent by-election force. They can stand for one thing in one town and a different thing in the town next door. Now, that's not the case for us. We're a party of government. We seek to run the whole country and form a government. But clearly the Liberal Democrats, we know from history, are a party because of that unique position. They can be a potent force in by-elections, and we've seen that. That doesn't detract from the fact that the only way to get rid of this Conservative government will be a Labour government, and that's where I think people are increasingly looking to and turning to, and the polls reflect that.
That was Jonathan Reynolds saying the Lib Dems are sort of uniquely well placed to take advantage of by-elections. If it was a protest vote against the Tories, people are more likely to go for this sort of empty vessel of a party in the shape of the Lib Dems. And he's saying that if you look at the national polls, when it comes to a general election, when people are choosing a government, Labour are actually in a decent place at this point. They're a few points ahead of the Conservatives. Ash, who is right, Jonathan Reynolds or Dan Hodges?
Oh, well, so who's right? Somebody who has been consistently wrong on everything else, or Jonathan Reynolds, who I think is just wrong this one time on TV? You're putting me in an impossible position in terms of giving an answer, Michael. I do think that it's a bad result for Starmer, and I'll tell you why. There is a lot of talk about this progressive alliance, and that in order for Labour to make any kind of electoral breakthrough, because we have a first past the post system, what progressives have to do is vote for who's most likely to win in any given constituency. So in many constituencies, that is going to be Labour. In some, like North Shropshire, where the Lib Dems do have space to do unexpectedly well, that might mean loaning your vote to the Liberal Democrats. Now, I see that argument. The problem is that there is no such thing as a progressive alliance that exists in party politics at the moment. So even if you were somebody who would normally vote Labour, but go, I'm going to vote Liberal Democrat to reduce the government's majority, and it will enable the Liberal Democrats to go into coalition with Labour after a general election, there's nothing to say that the Liberal Democrats would choose a coalition with Labour over the Conservatives. We saw what happened in 2010. If Boris Johnson was no longer the Tory leader, say it was Rishi Sunak, or indeed ex-Remainer Liz Truss, you can imagine a universe in which the Liberal Democrats choose to go into coalition with them. So I think that that's one of the problems of trying to explain everything through the lens of the Progressive Alliance, or indeed voting as though one presently exists, because one doesn't. In terms of what happened, I think, in North Shropshire, is that you had a lot of votes lost for the Conservatives. Many of them stayed at home, and there is no indication that there is a return of moderates to Labour. Quite the opposite. There is an exodus of progressives to other parties. Now, that is not the promise of Keir Starmer. If you can't win over at least some soft Tories, or indeed nick votes off the Liberal Democrats, it's unclear what his strategy is going to be in red wall seats. Who is he going for? Who is he going to get to turn out? Who is he going to, encourage to stay at home? Because the two that Labour have seriously contested, and there were defensive by-elections, they lost one and took one to a majority of just 323. So I do think this is part of a pattern of bad by-elections for Keir Starmer. I don't think it's simply all explicable through the lens of Liberal Democrats being good at by-elections, so that is a limited part of the story. And I think that there is something misleading about this Progressive Alliance conversation and the way it's going on. That is not a promise that's been written up by Ed Davey. That's just someone on Twitter saying one exists. It doesn't.
I'm not of the position this is a disaster for Labour, because I do feel like probably there was a lot of tactical voting going on there. Their candidate actually in their acceptance speech sort of said, I know lots of Labour voters lent me their vote and lots of Tory voters lent me their vote. I'll try and represent you all. So sort of no one seems to be denying that that none of that went on. But we do have, I want to bring up some more evidence for the prosecution against Keir Starmer, because Labour did campaign in the constituency. It wasn't that they said, not in a wink, maybe you should vote Lib Dem. This is Angela Rayner, obviously the deputy leader. She was in the constituency 2 days before the vote, canvassing. And even more striking is this advert from social media, which said, the Lib Dems can't win here. So that was an advert from the Labour Party pushed to people to say that, there's no way the Lib Dems can win. If you want to get the Tories out, vote for Labour. So that's kind of the opposite of a progressive alliance strategy. Obviously, the Lib Dems did win there. There are, as Ash said, also other examples of Labour doing fairly poorly in recent by-elections, which cannot be put down to tactical voting. So these are Labour's vote shares and most importantly, changes in seats in by-elections since Starmer took over. So you can see here, Hartlepool, Labour, that was a 2-horse race between Labour and the Conservatives, and they were down 9%. Can't blame that on tactical voting. Chesham and Amersham, that probably was a tactical voting one. That was people going to the Lib Dems. Batley and Spen, again, that was a seat that Labour were defending, and they lost 7.4%. You can't put that down to tactical voting. So a mixed picture. For me, this one by-election on its own doesn't show this is a disaster for Keir Starmer. It's obviously way more of a disaster for Boris Johnson, but there isn't that much evidence that in by-elections where tactical voting isn't taking place, Labour are able to take advantage of that, or people are tactically voting for the Labour Party, because that would obviously, if there's a progressive alliance, then you need it to go both ways.